Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Focal Point. I'm your host, Alex Newman, for the American Media Periscope Network. We are honored to be sitting here next to Kash Patel, extraordinary individual. He's held numerous different senior posts in the government, one of Trump's top aides. He's got experience as a federal prosecutor. He's got experience actually as the chief of staff at the Department of Defense, one of the biggest bureaucracies on the entire planet, millions of employees, trillions of dollars in assets. He also worked at the National Security Council during the Trump administration and served as the principal deputy for the Director of National Intelligence. So he's got just a huge range of experience. Kash, it's great to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me on, especially here at Trump Doral. It's pretty cool.
It's awesome. It's great to be with you. It's an honor to have you. So I want to start with the Department of Defense. That was one of your most recent assignments, and you were at the very top. Some of the fake media said this was Trump trying to spite the DOD. There's been a lot of talk about a leftward drift among some of the brass. Have you noticed that? What's happening at the Department of Defense, and what does it mean for national security?
Well, tragically, what's happening at the Department of Defense is the last thing that should ever happen in any government agency, which is the politicization or weaponization or whatever verbiage you want to use it. I mean, especially when it comes to the United States military. They are supposed to be apolitical by definition. They are not supposed to turn based on headlines and politics. And I know, having served as a civilian in the military on numerous stints, not just as chief of staff, in Democratic administrations, Republican administrations, you just don't allow politics to enter. And knowing the folks that are now at the senior leadership position, Chairman Milley, Secretary Austin, and those guys who I knew before they became political animals, I knew they had the capability to do the job, but they jettisoned that responsibility because they wanted to either stay in power, stay in their position, or look good in the media, tragically. And that's a fail for America. I mean, the best example I can give you is the Department of Defense has these things called concept of operation plans, CONOPS, or campaign plans, CAM plans. And what that is DOD speak for how do we move the machine? 3 million people, 1 million uniform, 1 million civilian, 1 million reserve, right? $750 billion budget and $2 trillion in assets. And what do we focus on? So the commander-in-chief says, let's focus on Al-Qa'ida, ISIS, Afghanistan. Let's get out of these wars. Let's protect our borders, etc., right? And President Trump had a very simple list when it came to national security. Secure the border, kill Al-Qaeda senior leadership, wipe out the emirs of ISIS, bring home American hostages, and get us out of the forever wars. It's not really political, right? Like, who wants to argue against that? And we, I believe, were very successful on all those fronts. When the Biden administration came in, their first campaign plan for the DOD, the first big movement of the machine, was on climate change. And, it's stuff you just can't make up, right? You expect the first campaign plan from the commander-in-chief and his DOD to be maybe Chinese fentanyl, maybe the border, maybe Afghanistan, maybe China, maybe Russia, right? Things like that. And so you have to ask yourself, why do they do that? I'm not saying that there's not a place in time for a discussion on climate change and the weather and things like that. I just don't think it belongs at a DOD primary level of operations. And that's the shift, right? We had what we did in Trump, and then they came in and basically said, what did you guys do? We're going to do the opposite, because that's what the media and the politics wanted. And these individuals that served, I think, tremendously in previous posts. I was in the Situation Room heading up Trump's counterterrorism platform when we killed Baghdadi, and Chairman Milley was there. And the reason I bring this up is because he did his job that night. I saw him provide advice to the commander-in-chief when asked. That's the role of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He has, by law, no authority to operate in the chain of command. That goes from the president to the Secretary of Defense. And then you fast forward to, he's out there apologizing for walking across Lafayette Square. He's out there leaking to the media. He's admitted to giving interviews and talking to his Chinese counterpart and literally saying, our top military advisor is saying to our arch nemesis, we will call you, me specifically, if we decide to attack. That is a monumental failure of military leadership. It's an unlawful entering of the chain of command. It's a seizure of duty from the commander-in-chief. And that's just one instance, but it's a pretty stark one. And so you see They shift. It's not like he was always like that or other folks were always like that, but they shifted because they wanted to stay in the seat they had. So they bent the knee to the administration that came in.
That's incredible. I want to pick up a little bit on this issue with China, because what Milley was reported to have done, to me, that struck me as, maybe criminal. Maybe something that rises to the level of, we've got to get prosecutors involved. On the subject of China, are you concerned about China's operations in the United States? There's been a lot of talk.
Yeah.
I know the Chinese government's preparing their population for potential war against America. Are we ready, and does the government in Washington take seriously enough this threat?
I don't believe this government, this administration, I don't believe does. I think President Trump did. He made it a primary task. He said, we are going to take on the CCP in a holistic approach, not just militarily. And what do I mean? He implemented the largest scale tariffs in modern day history against China. He shifted the trade deficit to the favor of the United States for the first time in, I think, a decade. And those are just like some non-military economic style options that a commander-in-chief can levy against them. He also prevented them from manipulating their currency and taking over as the world currency. The US dollar, that's our strength, or used to be, in the globe. And so when you couple that with things like jettisoning Chinese diplomats because they were actually conducting unlawful activity here in the United States of America, spying on Americans, operating police stations, as we've just now found out, and things like that. Even though the DoD is 3 million people strong, and the intel community is, 50 to 100,000, if you tell everyone the primary mandate is the weather and other things, you can't tell those people the primary mandate is also the CCP, the border, etc., right? Chinese fentanyl and things like that. So there's only so many people in the government, and the decision, whether you agree with it or not, comes from the commander-in-chief, right? And so we've just seen the effects of a drastically different style of governance and what was a priority when it came to national security between President Trump and President Biden.
Amazing. Turning over to the Department of Justice now, you've served as a federal prosecutor and also as a federal public defender, so you've been on both sides of that. But we're seeing with the January 6th, there's a lot of accusations that the Biden administration has weaponized the DOJ to go after their political opponents. Do you see that? Are you concerned by that? Is this a new phenomenon that just began under Biden? What have you seen on that front?
I think it's an erosion of the justice system that started when President Trump announced his first candidacy back in 2015-16. And, we can wind the clock back to Russiagate. I was the chief investigator for Chairman Newsing, exposing the Russiagate scandal. And now, half of the world still thinks President Trump is a Russian asset because folks like Adam Schiff and the media and company just blurted that out without looking at the intelligence. And we put out what we factually found, the FBI documents, and we showed that the Hillary Clinton campaign unlawfully used campaign funds to buy bogus intelligence overseas and then illegally import it to the United States and put it before a federal judge and lie, just to target a political opponent. That happened in 2016 America. And what I believe that the end result was a bifurcation of the system of justice. Now you have a two-tier system of justice. And it hits at every point, whether it's January 6th, whether it's the classified documents case and how President Trump and President Biden are treated differently, how politicians are targeted or not targeted, how the FBI has been caught embedding sources in Christian houses of worship. These are political decisions. They're not intelligence-based decisions on how to move the apparatus, because I'm not saying that there's no scenario where we have criminal activity occurring inside, whether it's religious institutions or fraud or etc. I'm not saying that never occurs in America, but that was not an intelligence-based decision. That was, Trump supporters are largely conservative Christians, or most conservative Christians, I should say, are largely Trump supporters. So let's weaponize the FBI. Let's target him. Let's do that. And I'll give you a couple more examples. And it wasn't a Republican versus a Democratic thing. The Republicans did it to Trump too. When Rod Rosenstein was basically the Attorney General, he was approached by Devin Nunes and I and we went to him and Chris Wray and said, look, here are a bunch of subpoenas. We know the Russiagate scandal didn't happen on your watch. Will you help us clean it up? And he basically said no. They refused to comply with the subpoena. Paul Ryan was feckless as a speaker. And we found ways to force them because, we can get into that later about how we control some of the funding lines so we can get the documentation necessary. But Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray also launched an investigation into me, a senior congressional staffer, and others on Capitol Hill to get dirt on the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee because we were exposing the fraud at the FBI. We didn't find that out until just 4 or 5 months ago. Google notified us, me personally, and said, the 5-year limit has expired, so we can now notify you that you, Kash Patel, and a list of other people, the DOJ subpoenaed your personal records, your financial records, your telephone records, and your whatever else, right?
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't just Google. That's the one we know about. So when Rod Rosenstein, as the acting attorney general, in January of 18, threatened to investigate Devin Nunes and I, he had already done it months beforehand. And what was the basis of that? It's what illegality were we conducting on the House Intelligence Committee? So they were weaponizing it back then. Trump appointees, unfortunately, against a Republican-led House of Representatives, and our mission was just to put out the truth. And it took years, and we got it out, but that unfortunately fractured the DOJ that I used to work for, and our justice system is no longer the premier justice system in the world. And countries are rightfully saying, America, you can't tell us about your due process and that you treat everyone equally. You don't. And whether you want to look at how the Bidens are treated, obviously with Chairman Comer's recent publication of the pay-for-play scheme and 9 individuals, or Hunter Biden is treated on the laptop, they are not able to say definitively that we're not acting based on politics, because they're not. The intelligence and the facts just don't support it. So a judicial system in America that's singular, to me, is the bedrock of society. It's where you get accountability. It's the question I get all the time, and we don't have that right now. And we'll see where it goes, and how Hunter Biden is treated, and how Joe Biden is treated, and how Donald Trump is treated, because of course he's supposedly still under investigation. And you raise the Jan 6 folks, and that's a whole nother dimension to the judicial process. Some of those folks committed crimes of violence and have to be punished, but a lot of them didn't. And for me, a former federal public defender who argued for bail, bond, for violent criminals with criminal histories, and received it because that was the right thing under the law with the facts to do. You have people who are north of 50, 60 years old with little or no criminal history, and they were denied bond. So it's not just the Justice Department. The judiciary in Washington, D.C. bought into it because they wanted the narrative out there that this was an insurrection. And it just wasn't. That's not the law, because this DOJ of all DOJs, had there been an actual insurrection crime to charge, they would have charged it. But the media carried their water, and they got the narrative out there, and we're still discussing it, 2+ years later. And when it comes to DOD and the National Guard, Donald Trump acted more than appropriately, preemptively. And we now know, without equivocation, that Nancy Pelosi and Mayor Bowser turned down the request for National Guards, that we personally at the DOD went there days ahead, and they turned it down in writing. And the law simply requires, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, civilian leadership of the military is a core principle of the United States of America. And so our founding fathers were like, we don't want military coups. But sometimes the military is needed to assist law enforcement. We've all been to concerts and sporting venues, and we see the National Guard dressed up and assisting with traffic duty and, just general security situations. But the National Guard can only be employed and deployed after 2 things happen. 1, the president must authorize it. And 2, the local governor, or mayor in this instance, since it's D.C., must request it. Otherwise, it cannot happen. Days before January 4th, Donald Trump, with me in the Oval and the Secretary of Defense and a few others, authorized 10 to 20 National Guardsmen. We went immediately to Nancy Pelosi, who controls the Capitol Police, we're the police for the Capitol, and Mayor Bowser, who's the governor of Washington, D.C., essentially, and said, we've got the authorization. Can you provide the request? And they, in writing, in their own letters and timelines, said, absolutely not. And just imagine the security situation on January 6th had I had 10,000 National Guard there, or had I had a perimeter fence established, right? I'm not saying that the left wanted the violence to occur, but I think there was a part of the left that wanted a political narrative that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist, and so are his supporters. And now you fast forward the clock, and you have Joe Biden attacking MAGA supporters. You have Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, going to Congress and lying about targeting domestic violent terrorists and padding his statistics, and saying criminal cases that are happening in Oklahoma are somehow related to domestic violent terrorists. So the numbers go up, and he goes to Congress and say, it's on the rise. MAGA supporters, America First people are, really need to be targeted. That is the ultimate weaponization of the government. And we've seen, just a slew of whistleblowers come out, and there's so much more information now that we could talk about, but that's just a couple of vignettes.
Fascinating. Now, you wrote a book about government gangsters. It sounds like you're describing some here,
Yeah.
and you've alluded in the past to the deep state, and I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of people. What do you mean when you talk about government gangsters? What is the deep state? What do they want, and how do we stop them?
Well, honestly, I wish that I didn't have to write the book, because then we wouldn't have to talk about this deep state, these government gangsters, the folks like Rosenstein, Wray, Milley, Gina Haspel, director of the CIA, Esper, and all these people who hijacked the chain of command from the commander-in-chief to do what they saw fit instead of what he directed them to do. And the book, even though it's written and it's been completed and the manuscript's been done for 6 months, as a government employee, you have to submit your manuscript back to review. And this administration has sat on it for 6+ months. So they won't let it print. So I've actually taken them to federal court just recently to sue them to release the manuscript so people can read, can read for themselves, agency by agency and department by department, who failed, how they failed, but more importantly, how do we fix it? Mm-hmm. And that's what Government Gangsters is all about. And I think it's kind of ironic that when Esper and Pompeo and all these guys take 3 months to get their book out, and I'm on month 7, and they are not responsive, and I have to file a federal lawsuit, I think that speaks for itself, that they have the manuscript, they don't want it out, but I list every government gangster by name, and President Trump was kind enough to call it the roadmap to winning back the White House. So hopefully, this summer, that book is out for all to read. But if I get into more details on it now, the FBI will be back at the door and say, oh no, you're talking about sensitive information. And of course, we didn't write it that way. We always protect people's privacy rights. We don't distribute classified information unlawfully. And I agree with the review process that it must be there. But it's being abused by the same government gangsters who don't want that information out. The truth on Jan 6th, the truth about Russiagate, the truth about CCP, the drug trade, how we handled the border during Trump, and how we used DOD assets and curbed fentanyl, and how we prevented hundreds of thousands of deaths in our country. They don't want that narrative there because it was a success under President Trump. And it's a catastrophe under Joe Biden. I mean, you have the Secretary of Homeland Security just recently saying the border is not open, it's never been open, it will never be open, but we have somehow 9,000 illegal immigrants coming across daily to the tune of, I don't know that math, I think it's like 2.5 million now in the Biden administration. That's never happened before. And most of those people aren't criminals, but some are. They come here illegally, that's a crime in and of itself, and then they go out and rape and murder and distribute drugs and kill our children. How can we be okay with that?
Yeah, it's truly extraordinary, and I've spoken with the former head of Customs and Border Protection, former head of ICE. They tell me that Biden is deliberately erasing the border. This is a deliberate and systematic attack on our border. Turning to President Trump now, you kind of had a front row seat for all of this. The persecution was unlike anything I had ever seen, and of course it's still ongoing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it? Is this going to continue indefinitely? I mean, are they finally going to bring down Trump? Is he going to keep fighting? Where do we go from here?
They started with Russiagate and the Steele dossier, and they sort of wrote their playbook in it, right? To get these government gangsters that I allude to cannot exist without their co-conspirators in the fake news mafia. The media carries their water for them because both of those together, what they want to do is, as you said, get Trump. So when Russiagate ended, they came up with Ukraine impeachment 1, Ukraine impeachment 2, January 6th. They came up with the classified documents case. And, let's fast forward to Hunter Biden's laptop and the 51 intel letter, right? To me, I call that the Steele dossier 2.0. Just think about that in and of itself, that letter, which, by the way, required pre-publication review because it was written by not just the former head of the CIA, but 50 other officers, the former Secretary of Defense, the former DCIA, former Director of National Security Administration, the former Director of National Intelligence. All these people, all these government gangsters signed it. And what did they write in it? That what was in the laptop is Russian disinformation. But the question is, why did they do that? Well, we now find out that Tony Blinken, then senior campaign aide to candidate Biden, reached out to Morell, that formerly head of the CIA, and said, hey, we need a counter narrative to this New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. 4 days later, the CIA under Gina Haspel authorized the publication of that letter, even though they knew the intelligence was false, and they published it, and Joe Biden would later hold it up at a debate for the presidency and say, look, intelligence leadership in this country is saying what you, Donald Trump, are saying about the laptop is a lie. It's Russian disinformation. That is the definition of an election rigging. why is there not a deeper investigation as to CIA operatives? It's now been publicized that not only did the CIA expedite the review and approve it, but they had CIA employees encouraging other CIA employees to sign the letter while employed at the CIA, all approved by Gina Haspel. And the CIA's mandate specifically precludes them from operating on domestic soil and entering into politics of any kind. And that's exactly what they did. So the reason I bring it up and call it the Steele Dossier 2.0, because it's the same thing. It's the Democrats and government gangsters getting together with the media, leaking information unlawfully, and then putting out false narratives, disinformation, to seize upon an election cycle. And when we get past, whatever the New York AG is doing, and the New York criminal case with President Trump, and whatever's going down in Georgia, there's going to be something else. They don't stop. But I think what we've done successfully through great programs like yours is cover all these for all these years. And gone are the days where, oh, it's a right-wing conspiracy, Russiagate. You guys are crazy. That didn't happen the way you said it. Well, now people are like, okay, that happened. And the 51 Intel letter thing, okay, you guys got that one right too. And it looks like there's a two-tier system of justice, not just in the courts, but administratively at agencies like the CIA and the FBI internally. So maybe these guys aren't lying. And to me, that's the win. If we can show them that happened and that we are, as we've always done, are putting out the truth, then I think that puts us on better footing leading up to 2024. And I think President Trump has done a brilliant job of saying, yeah, right now they're after me, and I can take it, but you're next. Mm-hmm. And I think that resonates with everyday Americans. What if it's my parents? What if it's my neighbors? How about my kids? Are you going to target them because they dare to say we are America first or have some conservative values that they share with President Trump? That's really, I think, starting to hit home. And it's one of the things I've encouraged President Trump to talk about, and he's done it wonderfully, to talk about the two-tier system of justice. But most importantly, he's talked about how to fix it.
Yeah. Well, all this raises, as far as the intelligence agencies goes, I think all this raises some really important questions. We have had the former acting director of the CIA, John McLaughlin, was on a roundtable discussion. Mm-hmm. They asked him, is the deep state really targeting Trump? And he says, well, thank God for the deep state. You got Chuck Schumer going on Rachel Maddow's show and saying the deep state, the intelligence agencies have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at Donald Trump.
They do.
So what do we do about this? I mean, how can we have agencies and bureaucracies that have the power to go after the elected president of the United States? Yeah. I mean, who is accountable? How do we fix this?
Then that's a large part of what Government Gangsters is about. I'll take the CIA and DOJ and FBI for this one. And what you do is when you don't have the presidency and you don't have the executive branch, you've seen how Merrick Garland runs this DOJ with Chris Wray at the FBI. It's based on politics, not on facts and law. And then they'll go out and trumpet a disinformation narrative, and they'll say, we investigate everyone equally. And we know that's not the case, whether it's Hunter Biden or what have you. And how you fix it when you don't have the executive branch? You go to the legislative branch. We have the House of Representatives, and they have the levers with appropriations bills. So every dollar that is spent in the United States government must originate in the House of Representatives, where the Republicans have the current majority. And the one thing government gangsters need, or the two things, their partners, their conspiracy partners in the fake news media, and money, our taxpayer dollars. And I'm not saying, and I'm definitely one of these guys, I know I've heard it, shut down the FBI. I disagree with that. They need wholesale change and a revamping, not just of personnel. That'll come later when there's a new election cycle, hopefully, and President Trump's reelected. But the money right now is what they act upon. And this is what I alluded to earlier. When we issued subpoenas, I think 17, when I was the chief investigator for Chairman Nunes, to the FBI and DOJ, it was like the first time it had ever happened in Congress. And they said, basically what they told Chairman Comer about the whistleblower just recently, we're not going to give it to you. You who have a constitutional oversight and a mandate over our agencies and departments for review, you're not receiving it. So what you do is you take their money. You don't take all of it. You take their money for their toys. Not the operational necessity stuff, but their new 50 Escalades, the new government building, headquarters, mausoleum down the street. And you seize it, as the House of Representatives can, through a fencing process or an appropriations process. And you'll see the next day the documents showed up. They did for us. We did it one time because the Speaker of the House must approve this sort of action. And Paul Ryan was feckless and didn't want to do it. And the one time we did it, 1,000 pages of documents showed up the next day, including the Broussard 302s, the illegal FISA warrant itself, the source documentation for Christopher Steele that we all now know is totally bogus, and guys like Stephen Halper and all this stuff. That's what came of it. Actual accountability. And that's how you do it. I know it's not the ultimate accountability because people are like, oh, we want the DOJ to prosecute them. Well, this DOJ won't prosecute them. They're not going to go after those guys. But I'm glad to see Jim Jordan and Comer and company subpoenaing the likes of the former DNI Clapper, who was embedded in the Russiagate hoax, and Brennan, who was at the CIA, who knew about it, who briefed President Obama that Hillary Clinton had a plan to basically take out Donald Trump, and it was on false intelligence. You know, this information must come out, and I think they're testifying hopefully in the next few weeks before Congress. And when you have that information under oath, that needs to go out to the American public. The documents that they subpoena and the testimony under oath. So the American public can hold the agencies and departments accountable. Because at the end of the day, the one thing that the DOJ and FBI and CIA, DOD, etc. always respond to is public embarrassment. And when you show they broke the law, they start turning on each other. And we're at one of those, friction points or break points, I think, coming up soon here with all of these things coming together. Hunter Biden, the 51 Intel letter, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, Russiagate, classified docs, prosecutions and investigations. There's so much going on right now. And they keep throwing more and more at President Trump, and he keeps throwing it right back. And I think people are starting to pay attention.
Well, this brings up another question about the House Republicans. Obviously, they're doing something. They've just released some important documents involving the Bidens and the Chinese. But
Right.
do you think they're doing enough? And do you have any tips for them? How could they improve what they're doing?
Well, look, it's a hard lift to investigate any one agency because Congress has numerous jobs, not just constitutional oversight. They have to do the debt ceiling. They have to fund the government. They have to do a lot of things. And what I've told them as, one of the former senior investigators in Congress is just pick like one or two things. You can't investigate everything. And if you pick one or two things, and I think they're doing a good job at that with Comer and Jordan, and you focus on, okay, the Biden pay-for-play scheme. 2 years ago, that was a right-wing conspiracy theory. But what I said during Russiagate and what we used to break them and find the truth was money doesn't lie. Subpoena the bank records. That's how we figured out Hillary Clinton paid for the whole Steele dossier and broke that story. Same thing here. Comer brilliantly subpoenaed the bank records. Now he's got to release them. So the American public sees the money going from A to B and C. That's black and white. And what are they going to say? Yeah, we took the $10 million, but it wasn't for this. It was just, the CCP was just being nice to us. We were being consultants. And what is Hunter Biden's skill set to be in business at a national security, defense, and intelligence level with these people anyway? And the timing of it is not coincidental that it happened while Joe Biden evidently was vice president and on his way out, and then all these millions start funneling in. So when you start putting out that documentation and the money, taxpayer money, is going to these investigations to hold these people accountable, and they are using taxpayer money to essentially operate a crime syndicate, that's a pretty powerful investigation that the American public is probably just going to be, gobsmacked by. They're going to be like, wait a second, is this the United States of America in 2023? Or are we back in 1883? It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately where we are. But I think if they focus on one or two things, the Hunter Biden, the 51 Intel, the pay for play, look at the FBI and DOJ, hard, and all of their actions, and continue to subpoena the documents and show those to the receipts, as we say to the American people, that's what's going to win.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, you've got a children's book. Actually, a friend sent it to us. I read it to my kids. They loved it. The Plot Against the King. On that broader subject, how do we get more young people involved? I mean, obviously they're getting a lot of propaganda in the public schools.
Yeah.
They're getting a lot of propaganda from the entertainment. How do Americans who love their country get more young people involved in defending America, defending our Constitution, defending our liberties?
Doing your show, getting out to the United States and talking to everyday Americans and saying, look, you don't need the number one show in the country or the number one publication. You just need to pick one issue. Schools, healthcare, the border, the economy, whatever, town council meeting, and be that champion for it. And the one thing I learned, one of the best lessons I learned from President Trump is like, Cash, anybody can highlight the problems in government. or in life, what's the solution? I said, well, our education system is crippling. I don't want CRT taught to our kids. I don't want the mandate of transgender, this and that, taught to people under the age of 12 or 13 or what have you. So I wrote a children's book. And then we dared to say, we're not going to talk about politics. I don't say, and it's a series. There's 2 books and a third one's coming. We take real life events, Russiagate, and the second one was actually The Plot Against the King, 2,000 Mules, about the election. We don't say be conservative or liberal, Democrat or Republican. We say these things happen in history. We have fun with it. We move them into medieval times and make some fun characters and say follow the facts, follow the clues. If you read or see something on TV, it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. And for kids to learn that at a young age with a piece of history tied to it, I think is powerful. So that was how we chose to impact the education system. It's minor, but hopefully other people can see it and say, wow, yeah, we can write kids' books. We can go out and explain economics to children. Why not? Why shouldn't that happen? Or voting, and what the Constitution is and how we protect America, and service, whether it's in uniform or in a civilian capacity. Those aren't things that the left has a monopoly on. We have to break it. And, whether it's Plot Against the King or what have you, we just hope other people start doing their own thing too.
Amen. We're just about out of time, but before we let you go, some of the things that you think average, everyday Americans can do to get involved, to make a difference, to do something important and protect our country. And then how do people follow you? I know you have Fight with Cash. What's the best way for people to kind of stay on top of what you're doing and support you?
Yeah, I'll take those in reverse real quick. So I'm on Truth Social @Cash, Truth Social @Cash. That's the only social media I'm on. If you think you're following me somewhere else, you're not. Okay. And the other way we thought we could use our mission first mentality, is create a 501c3. That's the Cash Foundation. So last year we gave away $100,000, and all of the proceeds from the shirts and the events we do all go back to the mission to help federal law enforcement, veterans, kids who want to go to summer camp, legal defense funds. We've helped people sue who've been defamed and things like that. So you can get involved in any way with whether it's Fight with Cash, and you go to thecashfoundation.com to get information on it, or you can just be on social media. But one of the things that all ties back into, and we didn't cover it, is big tech. You said, how can we help? How can everyday Americans help? And I say this when I speak, and a lot of times I get booed. And I say, raise your hand if you're on Twitter or Facebook or Google or YouTube or what have you. And 90% of the audiences are always raising their hand. And I said, hey, you're asking me how you can help. I want all of those companies to be censorship-free successes. That's what I want. I don't want them to shut down. But if they're going to be censored and censor our conduct and our content, then you can't be a part of them. Because they, big tech, we now know, embedded themselves with the FBI up into the last election cycle and literally had weekly meetings with the guy who mastered Russiagate, James Baker, the former FBI head counsel, who happened to be the Twitter #2 counsel years later. And they met weekly and said, oh, we think you should maybe not have this on Twitter, the world's biggest social media platform. So until they get fixed, I think we should take out their oxygen and say, you fix your social media companies and stop censoring us. And that is the easiest way possible. And whether you join Truth Social, and I'm obviously biased, I'm on the board of directors for President Trump there, or what have you, you can pick alternate platforms. You could just start your own Substack. You can just start printing articles. People read what is put out there. And the ties, the sort of the umbilical cord we have to big tech is one of the biggest crippling factors, because they censor speech with the government. So now you have the private and public sector coming together to rig elections and take away our rights, and the DOJ and FBI are doing nothing about it. So that's what I tell people. You can start there. It's an easy step, right? Yeah. Cut the cord. Stop watching mainstream media. Yeah. Watch this show. And just keep hammering. That's what we got to do.
Amen. Well, hey, really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much,
Cash.
Pleasure.
Appreciate
it.
All right, folks, I hope you were blessed by this. Share the link out. Send it to your friends. Send it to your congressman. Share it around. Thanks for watching AMP. This is Focal Point. I'm Alex Newman. Until next time, God bless you all.